Hi, it's Monday morning. This is David Roach. This is Quantum Strategy, and this is the micro podcast on macro matters that hopefully will matter to markets, or otherwise I don't really know why I'm doing this. Okay, now let's get started with a little bit of things that happened last week, which may influence this week. First of all, the China figures. We had the credit figures, which were 580 billion in new loans from banks, and that's about compared to 1.7 trillion a year ago, so well under half, but around about a third. The second figure we had was retail sales were 3%, industrial production was 5%, services up a little bit, but more or less flat. So where is all the industrial production going? And we have property investment down 10%. What does all this tell you? Well, if you can't get credit to grow, it means your stimulus is not working, because credit is the fuel in the tank of the economy. Secondly, retail sales being well below industrial production. Where is all the excess going? It's either going into inventory or it's going into exports, which Donald Trump is about to hit with a bat on the head. So the bottom line is the stimulus is not working. We know why it's not working. It's not going to household consumption, which is what is needed to rise. The confidence is not there. And instead, all the money in China printed and saved by households is finding its way into the bond market, where yields are at record lows, which actually is not what the authorities really want, because people might put their money into higher yielding US bonds, which would then, of course, cause the renminbi to collapse. Well, it's not going to collapse, but so far, measures not working. Okay, let's go to Germany. Nothing working. The Bundesbank, which is a thoroughly respectable central bank, has said that German growth next year is going to be 0.1%. And if Donald Trump puts on 10% tariffs on Europe and 60% tariffs on Chinese exports, then it'll be minus 0.5%. What this tells you is that the structural problems of German manufacturing, which is what Germans are good at, is really, really, really damaging the economy. And all these forecasts for a happy recovery in Europe next year are just absolute rubbish. Good luck if you're investing in them. Then finally, we do have to deal with a couple of geopolitical problems. Korea is finally going to try and impeach its completely bonkers president, who, because of his own political problems, he declared martial law, which is not what you do as the head of a state. So he has to be removed, and some more left-wing leaning entity, a person and government has to be put in place. This won't be, as the markets are saying, a kind of pro-China, anti-US government, because, the reason why the president's crisis is so deep in Korea is because this is a frontline state with Pyongyang looking at them across the border, and the border only about 20 kilometers away from Seoul. So it really does matter, and it matters internationally, because the damage done to Korea's reputation as a real first-class frontline democracy, and domestically, because the Korean people are justifiably enraged that a president should, call martial law for no reason, and thus bring out all the memories of the Korean nightmares of totalitarian rule in the past. So it's going to take a while, because the Supreme Court lacks two judges to judge the Prime Minister, to judge the President, and surprise, surprise, to fill those two places on the Supreme Court, the President, who is on trial, has to appoint the judges. Oh dear, oh dear, oh dear. Now, let us go to France. France has a new Prime Minister. He's called Mr. Bayrou. He's a farmer and from les Pyrénées-Atlantiques, which is down there near Spain, and he's a thoroughly decent kind of a bloke. He is also an academic farmer, because he has the highest degree that you can get in France to be a teacher of history, and he wrote a book about Henry I, and he wrote another book on the history of the great financial crisis. But he will get nowhere, and the reason he will get nowhere is because the parliament is under the control of the extremists, right and left. They have no interest in Macron succeeding in appointing a prime minister who succeeds and whose good deeds then reflect positively on Macron. No interest at all. What they want is things to get worse, but they don't want to be blamed for it. So they will go along a little bit with what Bayrou tries to do, but there will not be any fiscal reform in France until either Macron goes, which he won't. He's not due to go until like 2027, and there's no better job he'll ever get. And they will not give up either sabotaging the political framework in France and the economy until such time as there's an election, which will be in June. And then, of course, we'll get a populist prime minister and a populist president in France. And the result of that will be absolutely no reform. And then you move on to a European crisis. So that's the forecast for that. Now, let's look at some of the data coming up, which you may care a great deal more about than what I'm telling you about things that have already happened. First, the Fed. Well, I think the Fed will cut 25 basis points. No news there. Everybody else does too. The reason is because of the porridge syndrome. It's neither too hot nor too cold. Therefore, there's no need to have a great big jumbo cut, which they never needed anyway. And there's no need to stay on hold, because although the inflation progress has stopped being progress and is stagnating, it's probably kind of a pause between two floors on the way down in the elevator. Fine. Okay. Japan, the BOJ, they should, of course, raise rates by 25 basis points, but they may not. And I'm saying they will not, because they want to wait to see what Donald Trump will do to the economy by putting on tariffs on China and on their own goods, which would, of course, mean that if they raised rates this month, then next month they might have to reduce them again, which would look very, very silly. And Mr. Ueda does not want to look silly. Okay, now let us go for a minute to the other things that are coming out this week. We've got the German IPO, which will look like death, because unfortunately that's what's happening to German manufacturing and confidence. We've got the UK, we've got inflation, retail sales and jobs, which I think will speak probably towards the Bank of England staying on hold for the moment. And we've got Canadian CPI. And then, of course, there's a raft of central bank meetings. It's really a central bank fest this week. We've got the UK I mentioned, Japan I mentioned, the Fed I mentioned, and we've got Sweden, Norway, and Mexico. And I hope you enjoy all of that. And I hope you will continue to listen to my Monday morning briefing on the micro podcast on macro matters from Quantum Strategy and David Roach. Goodbye and have a good week. And we will be back as usual next week. No Christmas holidays here. No good cheer.